The gun was already on the table when Dara Hennessy walked into the room. She hadn't meant to be there. She'd been working the late maintenance shift at Caldwell Tower, the kind of job nobody notices, the kind of person nobody sees, and she'd come to replace the filter units on the 42nd floor ventilation system before the morning crew arrived. The elevator had been locked out for cleaning, so she'd taken the service stairs, and the service stairs on 42 opened directly into the boardroom anteroom, and the anteroom door had been propped open with a fire extinguisher by someone who clearly hadn't expected anyone to use it. She heard them before she saw them, not arguing. That would have been easier to dismiss. What she heard was the particular silence of men who have already decided something and are simply arranging the furniture of the decision. Low voices, the click of a briefcase, someone speaking in a language she recognized immediately, Belarusian, not Russian, a distinction almost nobody in that building would have caught, and saying, with the flat patience of a man who has said this many times before, that the transfer would happen Thursday or there would be consequences that couldn't be undone. Dara had stopped moving. Her cart was 3 feet behind her. The fluorescent tube she'd come to replace was still in her hand. Through the gap in the anteroom door, she could see the edge of the boardroom table, a crystal glass with 2 fingers of something amber, and a gun laid perpendicular to a stack of documents the way you might lay a pen. Casual, deliberate, a reminder that had been placed there rather than drawn. She knew what kind of meeting this was. She had grown up in Sudbury, in a neighborhood where the men who ran certain things held their meetings in the backs of hardware stores, and she had learned early that the sound of that silence, that arranged, decided silence, meant a girl who was paying attention should stop breathing. So she stopped breathing. The man at the head of the table was Callum Hartley. She knew him from the building directory, from the framed photograph in the lobby, from the 11 months she had spent cleaning his floors and emptying his wastebaskets. He ran Hartley Capital, the kind of private equity firm that didn't advertise, didn't need to, and operated in the space between what was legal and what was provable with a precision that had made him very wealthy, and apparently very connected to people who flew in from Minsk with guns they set on conference tables. Across from him sat a man she didn't recognize. Late 50s, grey suit, the build of someone who had been powerful for a long time and didn't feel the need to demonstrate it anymore. He was flanked by 2 younger men who hadn't spoken. Beside Hartley sat a woman in her 30s with a laptop open, and 2 men who Dara understood, from the quality of their listening, were there to translate. Except they weren't doing a very good job of it. The grey-suited man had said something that made one of the translators glance at the other, and then at the floor. Hartley was watching them with the controlled expression of a man trying not to show that he was losing ground. "What did he say?" Hartley asked. The first translator cleared his throat. He says the timeline is acceptable, but the margin requires adjustment. The grey-suited man's expression did not change, but one of the men behind him shifted his weight, barely, an inch. Dara had grown up trilingual, English, French, Ukrainian, because her grandmother had refused to let the language go, had spoken it at the dinner table and through the kitchen window, and during every single car ride until Dara could dream in it. She had picked up Russian at university, Belarusian from a roommate whose family was from Brest, Polish from 3 years of listening to her downstairs neighbor and, on a whim, to understand, German because she liked, and precision, Spanish because it was everywhere. Mandarin because she'd spent 2 years working data entry for a shipping logistics firm, and the documents kept arriving in formats nobody else could read. What the grey-suited man had actually said, in Belarusian, was that the margin was a fiction, and Hartley's people had shorted the audit numbers by 40%. And if Hartley tried to move Thursday, they would dissolve the arrangement and recover their losses through methods that would not involve lawyers. That was not a request for a margin adjustment. That was a threat of a very specific kind, and the translator had either missed it or chosen not to say it, and Dara could not tell which. Hartley said, in the careful voice of a man negotiating on faulty information. "Tell him we can look at the margin. We can have revised figures by end of week." The translator translated this. The grey-suited man responded. The translator said, "He finds that agreeable." The grey-suited man had said, in Belarus, that Hartley had just confirmed he knew about the discrepancy and that this was the only useful thing that had happened tonight. Dara's hand had gone cold around the fluorescent tube. She was standing in a service corridor in a building she cleaned for 23 $40 an hour, and she was watching a man walk into a trap being built from the inside. And the part of her brain that had always been more awake than was convenient for her was doing rapid calculations. She should leave. She knew she should leave. She was nobody. She was the woman who replaced the filters and restocked the paper towels and left before the executives arrived in the morning, and the correct thing to do was to back down the service stairs and finish the rest of her route, and go home and not think about what she had heard. She nearly did. Then the grey-suited man said something else, short, almost conversational, and even the translator, who hadn't been catching the subtext, went still, because that sentence, in any language, meant only one thing: close the loose ends. The translator looked at Hartley. Hartley looked at the translator. The translator said nothing. Dara stepped through the door. She had no plan. She had a fluorescent tube in one hand and a maintenance cart behind her, and she was 31 years old, and she weighed considerably more than any of the women in this building were expected to weigh, and she had grease under one fingernail from a ventilation bracket, and she walked into that boardroom the way she had learned to walk into rooms her whole life. Like she had every right to be there, like her presence required no explanation, like she was simply moving through a space that happened to contain other people. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. One of the men behind the grey-suited visitor said, in Russian, "What is this?" Hartley said sharply. "How did you get in here? This floor is supposed to be. Your Panel 4 ventilation unit has a blocked primary filter," Dara said, setting the fluorescent tube down on a side table with a small, deliberate click. "It'll trigger the fire suppression sensor by morning if it's not cleared. Facilities sent me up." She said it evenly, looking at Hartley, and then she looked at the two translators. "I can come back." She let the offer sit there. Come back, as if she'd seen nothing, as if she hadn't understood a word. The translator, the one who'd been softening the language all evening, said something quietly to the grey-suited man. She caught every word. He was suggesting they let her do her job and move on. The grey-suited man was watching her with the particular attention of someone who made his living reading rooms. Then he said, in Belarusian, slow and deliberate, "Ask her if she understood what she heard." The translator looked at Dara. In English, he said, "Mr. Vashchenko asks if you need assistance finding the panel." Dara looked at Vashchenko. In Belarusian, she said, quietly and without performance, "The panel is behind the east wall. I can find it without assistance." The room went very still. Vashchenko looked at her for a long moment. Then he said in Belarusian, "How much did you understand?" "Enough," she said, still in Belarusian, still steady. He said in Russian now, testing the range of her, "And what do you think we should do about that?" She answered in Russian, "I think you should hear what your translator has been leaving out, and I think Mr. Hartley should hear it too. Because the meeting you're both in right now is not the meeting either of you came here to have." Hartley said, "What is happening? Someone tell me what is happening." Vashchenko held up one hand, and Hartley stopped talking. It was the kind of authority that didn't require volume. He studied Dara for what felt like a long time. Then he said, in careful, accented English, "Please, sit." She didn't sit. She stood at the corner of the table, arms loose at her sides, the way her grandmother had always stood when she was about to say something that needed saying. "Your translator," she said to Hartley, "has been softening Mr. Vashchenko's statements significantly. When Mr. Vashchenko said the margin requires adjustment, what he actually said was that your audit numbers are short by 40%, and he knows it. When your translator said he found your proposal agreeable, What Mr. Vashchenko actually said was that you just confirmed you were aware of the discrepancy. He has been building a record of your acknowledgements, not negotiating with you. Hartley's face went through several expressions very quickly, and the last thing he said, Dara continued, her voice staying level, was not a business statement. It was an instruction to his associates. I won't translate it directly, but I can tell you that it means the people in this room who are not Mr. Vashchenko should think carefully about what happens next. She looked at Vashchenko. In Belarusian, she said, I've told him what you said. Now I'd suggest we all agree that the meeting should start over, honestly. Because whatever you came here to accomplish, you're not going to get it from a man who doesn't know what conversation he's in. There was a very long silence. One of the men behind Vashchenko, the taller one, said something in rapid Russian that Dara tracked without moving her expression. He was asking Vashchenko whether the woman was a risk or an asset. He used the word for asset like a question. Vashchenko said, still watching Dara, I haven't decided. She said in Russian, decide quickly. I still have 4 more floors to do tonight. Something moved in Vashchenko's expression that might, in a different context, have been amusement. He looked at Hartley. He said, in careful English, your building has very interesting maintenance staff. Hartley was staring at Dara with the expression of a man recalculating a significant number of assumptions. Who are you? He said. It came out less like a question than like a door he hadn't known was there. Dara Hennessy, she said. I do the 41st and 42nd floors, Tuesdays and Fridays. How many languages do you speak? She considered the question. Depends on whether you're counting the ones I read but don't speak aloud. 7. Comfortably. 8 if you let me look at a dictionary first. Hartley looked at his translator. The translator looked at the middle distance. Were you? Hartley said, his voice very controlled now. Ever going to tell me that I was walking into a documentation trap? The translator said nothing. Long enough that everyone in the room understood the answer. Vashchenko said, in Belarusian, to Dara, why did you tell him? She answered him in Belarusian, quietly, so that only he would understand the full version of her answer. Because I've watched this building for almost a year, and I know every floor of it, and I know what it looks like when something good is about to be destroyed by something careless. I don't work for Mr. Hartley, but I've cleaned his floors long enough to know he is not a careful man, and you were about to give a careless man enough rope. That doesn't end well for anyone, including a man who collapses leaves nothing to collect from. Vashchenko was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you are either very brave or very foolish. My grandmother would have said those are the same thing. He almost smiled. What did she do, your grandmother? She was a schoolteacher in Kharkiv who got her whole building out before 1943. She said the trick was to never let anyone see you deciding. Vashchenko looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up the gun from the table, just picked it up, the way you'd pick up a pen, and put it inside his jacket. The atmosphere in the room changed the way a room changes when a window is opened. He said to Hartley in English, I would like to begin again. Correctly this time, with your, how do you say, maintenance staff, if she is willing to translate. Hartley looked at Dara. Something in his expression had shifted in a way she hadn't seen before on any face in this building. People looked past her every day, without thinking about it, without even registering that they were doing it. She was the person who made the surfaces clean, and the air breathe and the systems run, and she had learned to be invisible by necessity, because visibility in the rooms she'd grown up in had costs. He was looking at her now. Would you be willing, he said, and then he stopped as if he was aware that the question he was about to ask was not a small one, that it had weight to it, that it required a different register than he usually used. Would you be willing to stay? She thought about her cart in the anteroom. She thought about the 3 remaining floors on her route, the broken bracket on 39 that she'd been meaning to report, the Tuesday morning crew who'd arrive at 6 and expect the filter on 42 to already be done. She thought about her grandmother, who had looked at a burning city and decided there were things you could walk away from and things you couldn't. "I'll stay," she said. The meeting took 4 hours. She translated everything, every word, every implication, every lateral meaning, every cultural register that shifted the weight of a sentence, and she flagged twice when she believed a proposed clause was deliberately ambiguous in a way that would disadvantage Hartley in Belarusian commercial law, but not in Canadian contract language. She knew Belarusian commercial law because she had spent 8 months doing transcription work for a trade law firm in 2019 and had read the source documents because she couldn't help reading the source documents. She always read everything. She had been told, since she was a child, that this was excessive. She had never agreed. By 2 in the morning, the revised terms were on the table, and both men had initialed them, and the atmosphere had changed from something that had weight and danger to something that was merely tired and businesslike. Vashchenko's associate, the taller one, who had asked about asset or risk, brought her a coffee without being asked. She took it. It was very good coffee, the kind the executives in this building ordered in and she cleared away every morning. Hartley walked Vashchenko's group to the elevator. When he came back, he stood for a moment in the doorway of the boardroom, looking at Dara, who was tidying the table the way she always tidied tables, because the habit was in her hands regardless of context. "What do you actually do?" he said. "During the day, I sleep," she said. "Night shift." "Before this, what did you do before this?" She straightened a stack of papers. "I worked transcription for a law firm. Before that, data processing for a shipping company. Before that, I was doing a master's in applied linguistics, and I ran out of money in the 3rd year, and I didn't want to take the loan, so I took the night work, and I kept meaning to go back." He was quiet for a moment. "Applied linguistics, language acquisition and policy. My thesis was on minority language preservation post-Soviet border regions." She glanced at him. "I never finished it. What was the argument?" She looked at him properly then, because it was a strange question for 2 in the morning in an emptied boardroom, that the languages people think are dying are actually hiding, that they don't disappear. They go quiet and wait, and the people who carry them without announcing it. And then one day, someone for a moment. "I have a translation consulting contract up for renewal in September," he said. "The firm I use missed 3 material distinctions in a Warsaw arbitration last year, and it cost us significantly." She didn't say anything. I want to be clear, this isn't." He stopped. He was, she noticed, not accustomed to being uncertain about how to phrase things. "I'm not offering you a job because of tonight. That would be inappropriate, and I imagine you'd tell me so." "I would," she said. "I'm telling you that there is a contract available, and that the interview process is formal, and that I'll have my operations director send the posting to HR this week, and that you are the most qualified person I have encountered in 11 years of running this firm for the actual work the contract requires." He looked at the table, "And that I should have known that. I should have. I see this building every day, and I don't see it. I don't see any of it. I don't know how that happens." Dara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "It happens because nobody teaches you to look. And nobody teaches you because it's convenient not to be looked at, for a lot of different reasons by a lot of different people for a very long time." She picked up her fluorescent tube from the side table. "The panel is still blocked. I should finish my route." She went to the east wall and opened the maintenance panel and replaced the filter in 4 minutes, the way she had done it 40-something times on this floor alone. Behind her, she heard Hartley gather his things and then stop gathering them. He said, "The posting will go up Thursday," she said without turning around. "I'll look for it." She finished her route. She did 39, 40, 41. She logged the broken bracket. She restocked the supply cabinet on 38 that one of the junior analysts kept raiding for pens without replacing. She rode the service elevator down at 4 a.m. and walked to the bus stop on Bay Street in the October dark. And the city was empty the way it only is in those specific hours, and The streetlights made the wet pavement shine orange and gold, and she thought about her grandmother who had said once that the most important thing was not to be so busy being invisible that you forgot what you were hiding. She got the contract. It took 11 weeks because the process was formal the way he'd said it would be, and she sat in 3 separate interview panels and did 2 translation assessments and a legal terminology examination that she finished in 40 minutes when they'd allotted 2 hours, and at no point did anyone in those panels know what had happened on the 42nd floor on a Tuesday night in October. That was fine. She wasn't there because of that night. She was there because she was, demonstrably, the best person for the work. The posting had said the role was Senior Translation Consultant, Contracts and Arbitration. It had listed required languages. She met 5 of the 6 mandatory qualifications and all 4 of the preferred ones. The salary was nearly 3 times what she made on the night shift. She gave her notice on a Friday. Her supervisor said it was a shame to lose her. She said she agreed. She heard, through the slow channels by which news travels in large buildings, that the 2 translators from that night had not been renewed. She didn't know the details, and she didn't ask for them. On her first morning in the new role, she arrived at the 42nd floor via the main elevator at 8 in the morning. In a grey blazer she'd bought second-hand and had altered to fit properly, and she walked through the lobby where her photograph was not on the wall, and she sat at a desk with a window that looked out over the city in the early light, and she opened the first document in her caseload, and it was in Polish, and she began to read. The building looked the same from every floor. She knew that already. It looked different when you were finally allowed to see it.